The wedding that was supposed to be the beginning of their happy life, a lavish celebration. Hundreds of guests, vows of love, everything was perfect. But a gift from the bride's father turned the day into a nightmare. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching this video from. Camilla and Malik were born just a few months apart, in the same affluent neighborhood of Johannesburg, South Africa. Their families had known each other for years, bound by both business connections and a deep sense of cultural heritage. Theirs was a world of privilege, where generations of success had built a foundation of wealth and stability. But for Camilla and Malik, none of that mattered as much as the simple joy of growing up together. From the earliest days, they were inseparable. Their mothers, both successful entrepreneurs, often arranged playdates, knowing how much their children enjoyed each other's company. Their fathers, both dignified men with a keen sense of tradition, would often joke that the two were destined to be together, even when they were too young to understand what that meant. In the early years of their childhood, they spent their afternoons chasing each other through their family's sprawling gardens, their laughter echoing through the air. When they weren't running outside, they sat side by side, poring over books, imagining fantastical worlds, or competing in video games that Malik almost always won. Even then, Camilla's competitive nature shone through, and she would demand a rematch every time she lost. As they grew older, their connection deepened in ways neither of them could quite put into words. They always gravitated toward each other, even in social settings where other children were present. Their bond was effortless, a quiet understanding that didn't need constant reaffirmation. They trusted each other implicitly, their lives intertwined in a way that felt both natural and unbreakable. When they started primary school, their closeness became even more apparent. Their teachers often remarked on how well they worked together, how seamlessly they complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. Malik was logical, steady, and methodical, while Camilla was creative, bold, and unafraid to take risks. Whenever she got restless in class, doodling in the margins of her notebooks instead of listening, Malik would nudge her and whisper reminders about the lesson. And when Malik hesitated before speaking up, uncertain about voicing his opinions, Camilla would whisper encouragement, pushing him to be more confident. By the time they were 10, their friendship had become a permanent fixture in their lives, something neither of them could imagine being without. They had their fair share of disagreements. Malik's practicality sometimes clashed with Camilla's impulsiveness, but even their arguments were short-lived. They knew each other too well, understood each other too deeply, to let small fights drive a wedge between them. Then came adolescence, and everything began to shift in ways neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't a sudden change, but a gradual evolution, subtle hints at first. They started to notice things about each other that had never stood out before. Malik realized that Camilla's laughter had a way of lighting up a room, that the way she scrunched her nose when she was annoyed was strangely endearing. Camilla, in turn, noticed that Malik had grown taller, his once boyish face now carrying sharper features, his quiet confidence making him stand out in a crowd. Other people noticed too. Their classmates started teasing them, asking if they were together. At first, they brushed it off, laughing at the idea. But as the years passed, the question no longer seemed as absurd as it once had. By the time they turned 16, their relationship had taken on a new dimension. What had once been an easy friendship was now tinged with something more, something neither of them fully understood but both felt deeply. It wasn't just about companionship anymore. It was about the way Malik's heart raced whenever Camilla leaned in too close, the way Camilla found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. One evening, after a long day of studying for exams, they sat on the rooftop of Camilla's house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the warm breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine. It was in that quiet moment that Camilla finally voiced the thought that had been lingering between them for months. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "If we were more than just this," she said, gesturing between them. Malik felt his pulse quicken. He had thought about it, of course he had, but he had never dared to say it aloud. "Yeah," he admitted after a long pause, "I do." Camilla met his gaze, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she found there must have given her the answer she needed, because she smiled soft, hesitant, but full of something unspoken. And then, before either of them could overthink it, she leaned in and pressed a light, fleeting kiss to his lips. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had planned for, but both welcomed with open hearts. As their teenage years continued, their relationship only grew stronger. They were still best friends, still each other's greatest supporters. But now there was a new depth to their bond. They navigated the challenges of young love together, learning what it meant to be not just friends but partners. There were challenges, of course. Not everyone believed that young love could last. Some whispered that it was just a phase, that they would eventually grow apart. But Camilla and Malik didn't care. They knew what they had was real, and they weren't about to let go of it just because others doubted them. By the time they graduated from high school, they had already begun making plans for the future, not just their individual ambitions, but the life they wanted to build together. They had defied the odds, proven that what had started as childhood friendship blossomed into something much greater. When they were accepted into universities in the same city, they took it as a sign that they were meant to continue this journey side by side. As they prepared to step into adulthood, neither of them had any doubt. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Their love was not just a young romance, it was something enduring, something they knew would withstand the test of time, and they had no idea just how much their bond would be tested in the years to come. Camilla and Malik entered adulthood with a sense of purpose. Their dreams had been laid out for years, shaped by the ambitions they had nurtured since childhood. They were no longer just inseparable best friends who had fallen in love. They were individuals carving out their own paths, determined to leave their mark on the world. Their relationship remained strong as they transitioned from high school to university. Unlike many young couples who struggled with the newfound independence of college life, Camilla and Malik flourished. They attended different universities, both in Johannesburg, but remained deeply connected. Malik had enrolled in one of the country's most prestigious architectural programs, immersing himself in design. Camilla pursued fashion, focusing on African-inspired haute couture that blended traditional patterns with modern aesthetics. While their academic lives kept them busy, they always found time for each other. Weekends were sacred, reserved for long drives outside the city, trying new restaurants, or simply sitting together, talking about their dreams. They navigated challenges as a team, supporting each other through sleepless nights, academic stress, and the pressure to excel in competitive industries. As their studies progressed, their reputations began to grow. Malik's professors saw in him a rare blend of innovation and respect for historical structures, something that set him apart from his peers. He was not just an architect in training, he was a visionary, someone who saw buildings not just as structures but as legacies. By the time he was in his final year, he had already secured an internship with one of the top architectural firms in the country. Camilla's journey was no less impressive. She had started designing custom pieces during her second year, showcasing her work on social media. It didn't take long before her bold, vibrant designs caught the attention of influencers and industry insiders. By her third year, she had interned at a renowned fashion house, and her work had been featured in emerging designer showcases. She was ambitious, determined, and unafraid to challenge industry norms. Despite their demanding schedules, Camilla and Malik never lost sight of what mattered most: their love for each other. They had grown together, adapted to change, and embraced the evolving nature of their relationship. But even with all their success, one question remained unanswered: when would they take the next step? Camilla loved Malik deeply, but marriage was not something she wanted to rush into. She had seen too many stories of promising young women who sacrificed their ambitions too early, caught in the expectations of societal norms. She wanted to establish herself first, to prove that she could stand on her own before becoming someone's wife. Malik understood, even if part of him longed for the certainty of forever. Still, he waited, knowing that when the time was right, they would. She had always wanted to visit Kenya, enchanted by its landscapes and rich cultural heritage. When she suggested the trip, Malik saw it as the perfect opportunity. He had been carrying an engagement ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment, and now, as they planned their getaway, he knew he had found it. The first few days of their trip were magical. They stayed in a luxurious eco-lodge on the edge of a sprawling savanna, where wildlife roamed freely. Mornings were spent on safari drives, afternoons by infinity pools overlooking the plains, and evenings under a sky so full of stars it felt unreal. Camilla was in her element, capturing every moment on camera, sketching designs inspired by the landscapes and colors around her. Malik watched her, knowing there was no one else in the world he would rather share his life with. On the fourth night of their stay, he made his move. He had arranged a private dinner on a secluded terrace, with a breathtaking view of the vast wilderness. The table was set with candlelight, the air filled with the distant sounds of the savannah. As the meal progressed, Camilla talked animatedly about her future collections, about the possibilities she saw for expanding her brand. Malik listened, smiling, heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed his words countless times, yet when the moment arrived, he felt completely unprepared. As the last rays of sunlight faded into twilight, he reached for her hand. "Camilla," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swelling inside him. "I've loved you since before I even understood what love was. We've grown up together, built our dreams side by side, and I know without a doubt that there is no life for me without you in it." She blinked, realization dawning in her eyes as he slid from his chair and knelt before her. The ring was stunning, custom-made, a delicate fusion of modern elegance and cultural significance. A brilliant cut diamond sat at its center, flanked by intricate engravings of patterns that symbolized unity and eternity. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. "I don't want to rush you," Malik continued, his voice softer now, "but I know deep in my soul that you are the woman I want to spend my life with, whether it's now, a year from now, or 10 years from now. I'll wait for you. But if you're ready, I want to be your husband." For the first time in her life, Camilla found herself speechless. She had imagined this moment before, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming wave of emotions that crashed over her now. She saw her future in his eyes, felt the certainty of it in the way he held her hand. Tears filled her eyes, and she let out a choked laugh. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The world seemed to blur as he slid the ring onto her finger, as she fell into his arms. As they kissed beneath the vast, star-strewn sky, the sounds of the savannah surrounded them, the gentle rustling of the wind, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. It felt like the universe itself had conspired to make this moment perfect. That night, they lay awake in their villa, fingers intertwined, whispering about the future. They spoke of wedding plans, of the places they wanted to travel, of the family they hoped to build one day. They dreamt of a life that stretched beyond the present, filled with love, adventure, and unwavering devotion. Neither of them could have known what awaited them in the years to come. For now, all that mattered was this: they had made a promise to each other, one they intended to keep for a lifetime. The morning after Malik's proposal, Camilla woke up feeling as though she were living in a dream. The engagement ring on her finger caught the first golden rays of the African sun, sparkling with a brilliance that mirrored the joy swelling inside her. She turned in bed, finding Malik still asleep beside her, his breathing slow and even. For a moment, she simply watched him, overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened. They were engaged, no longer just childhood sweethearts, not just two ambitious people in love, but a couple who had promised forever. When Malik finally stirred awake, the first thing he saw was her smiling down at him, still filled with the remnants of last night's happiness. They spent the morning in quiet bliss, savoring the moment before the chaos of wedding preparations would inevitably take over. Returning to Johannesburg, they were met with an outpouring of excitement from family and friends. Their engagement became a celebration beyond just the two of them. Their parents, who had long hoped for this moment, immediately threw an intimate gathering in their honor. The house was filled with laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and stories about their journey together. Malik's mother pulled Camilla aside, pressing her hands between her own, eyes glistening with pride as she whispered how she had always known this day would come. The excitement of the engagement soon gave way to the reality of wedding planning. Camilla and Malik were both deeply ambitious, driven individuals, and they approached the process with the same level of determination they gave to their careers. They wanted their wedding to be more than just an extravagant affair. It had to reflect them, their love, their cultures, and the journey they had taken to get here. Choosing the venue was the first major decision. They both agreed that it needed to be unique, something breathtaking yet deeply meaningful. After weeks of searching, they found the perfect place, an exclusive mountaintop estate in the Western Cape, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The estate was both historic and majestic, perched on the edge of a towering cliff, surrounded by lush greenery and panoramic views of the endless blue sea. It was a place that felt timeless, just as they wanted their love to be. The moment they set foot on the grounds, Camilla could already envision the wedding. The ceremony would take place in an open-air courtyard, where guests would be seated beneath a canopy of white roses. The reception hall was a grand glass pavilion that reflected the hues of the ocean at sunset, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and intimate. They stood together on the terrace, the ocean breeze sweeping around them, and Malik took her hand, squeezing it gently as they silently agreed. This was the place where they would begin their forever. With the venue secured, the real planning began. No expense was spared. Their wedding would be an event unlike any other, blending elements of their cultural heritage with the sophistication of modern elegance. Camilla, ever the perfectionist, worked closely with planners to ensure that every detail was meticulously curated. Her dress, designed by one of Africa's top designers, would incorporate intricate beadwork and patterns inspired by their ancestry, blending tradition with haute couture. Malik, far less concerned with the specifics, had his own ideas about what the wedding should feel like. An atmosphere of warmth, joy and celebration, surrounded by the people who had shaped their lives. The guest list quickly grew into the hundreds: friends, family, industry figures from both the fashion and architectural worlds. Everyone wanted to be there. It became clear that this would not just be a wedding, but the event of the year. There were interviews, magazine features, and whispers of their wedding being the perfect blend of love and legacy. At times, it became overwhelming. Camilla found herself buried under endless decisions: floral arrangements, menu tastings, seating charts. Malik, seeing her stress, often reminded her to breathe, to take a step back and remember that at the heart of all this was their love. In the midst of the chaos, they found solace in small moments. Late at night, when the world was quiet, they would sit together on their balcony, talking about the future beyond the wedding. They dreamt of the home they would build, the adventures they would embark on. Malik often joked that he would let her have her way with all the wedding plans because, in the end, he only truly cared about one thing: that she would be the one standing beside him when the day came. Weeks turned into months, and as the wedding date drew closer, the anticipation grew. The venue was transformed into something out of a dream, a breathtaking vision of beauty and elegance. Every detail had been carefully executed, from the towering floral installations to the handcrafted invitations sent out to each guest. There were rehearsals, final fittings, and last-minute adjustments. The excitement was palpable, not just for them but for everyone involved. Then came the night before the wedding. It was tradition for the couple to spend it apart, but neither of them could sleep. They found themselves on the phone at midnight, talking in hushed voices, laughing about how surreal it all felt. Camilla confessed that despite all the grandeur, all the meticulous planning, what she was looking forward to most was the moment she would walk toward him, knowing that nothing else mattered. Malik told her that he had never been more certain about anything in his life. The morning of the wedding arrived with the first golden light breaking over the mountains. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of the sea. Guests began arriving, their laughter and chatter filling the courtyard. In separate rooms, Camilla and Malik prepared for the most important day of their lives. Camilla's gown was a masterpiece, shimmering under the light, adorned with delicate embroidery that told the story of their heritage. As her mother adjusted her veil, there were tears in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey her daughter had taken to get here. Malik, dressed in a tailored ivory suit, stood before the mirror, steadying himself. His best man patted him on the back, grinning. "You ready?" Malik met his own gaze in the reflection and smiled, more than ever. As the ceremony was about to begin, guests took their seats, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The music swelled, and the doors opened. Camilla stepped forward, her breath hitching as she locked eyes with Malik at the end of the aisle. The world around them blurred, the grand setting, the hundreds of guests. The weight of the event all faded into the background. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Neither of them knew that this perfect day would soon take an unimaginable turn. The air in the mountaintop estate was thick with anticipation. As Camilla stood just beyond the grand entrance of the ceremony hall, her hands gripping the bouquet of white orchids that had been carefully selected to match the cascading floral arrangements lining the aisle, she could hear the faint murmur of guests taking their seats, the occasional laughter, the soft strains of music playing in the background. Beyond the doors, Malik was waiting for her. The thought sent a tremor through her chest, not of nerves, but of something far greater. a certainty, a knowledge that she was about to step into the life she had always dreamed of with the man who had been a part of her world for as long as she could remember. The past hours had been a blur of final preparations of her mother's hands, adjusting the embroidery on her dress, of bridesmaids fluttering around her making last-minute adjustments, of laughter and excitement that only now settled into something deeper. The magnitude of the moment was sinking in. This wasn't just a celebration, this was a promise. Across the estate, Malik stood in the open courtyard, surrounded by his groomsmen. He was used to pressure to standing before an audience, to giving presentations about grand architectural designs, but nothing had ever compared to this. He had spent the morning in quiet reflection. His father had stopped by to share a few words of wisdom, his best man cracking jokes to ease the tension. But no matter how much he tried to stay relaxed, his heart had been racing since the moment he woke up. He had never doubted this day would come, had never wavered in his love for Camilla. But the weight of the moment was real. It was everything they had worked toward, everything they had imagined. The guests were seated beneath an open canopy of white roses, their chairs arranged in perfect rows leading up to an altar that overlooked the endless stretch of ocean below. The scene was like something out of a dream. The estate's courtyard bathed in soft golden light. From the setting sun was the perfect backdrop to the ceremony that would unite them forever. The ocean breeze carried the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs below, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to match the beating of his own heart. The moment arrived. The music swelled, and the doors opened. A collective hush fell over the crowd as Camilla stepped into view, her silhouette framed by the golden light streaming through the entrance. Time seemed to slow as she moved forward, each step deliberate, her veil flowing behind her like a whisper of something ethereal. Malik's breath caught in his throat. She was breathtaking. More than that, she was his. Camilla barely registered the guests' admiring whispers, the soft gasps of those seeing her for the first time. Her gaze was locked on Malik, the man who had been her best friend, her partner, her greatest love. Every doubt, every fear, every moment of uncertainty about what the future might hold disappeared as she walked toward him. Her father took her arm, leading her forward, his grip strong but full of emotion. He had been quiet that morning, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite place, one that she now understood as the bittersweet realization that his little girl was stepping into a new chapter of her life. When they reached the altar, he looked at Malik, his expression unreadable for a moment before he gave a nod of approval. The ceremony began, the officiant's voice carrying over the quiet gathering. Malik and Camilla barely heard the formalities. Their world had shrunk to the space between them, to the way their hands felt when they reached for each other, to the unspoken words exchanged in glances. When it was time for their vows, Camilla took a steadying breath, her fingers trembling only slightly as she held Malik's hands. She spoke first, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to spill over. She told him that he had been the foundation of her life for as long as she could remember, that he had stood beside her in every triumph, every failure, that he had loved her without hesitation, without condition. She told him that no matter what life brought, she would always choose him. Malik's vows were just as raw, just as unguarded. He told her that she had been the dream he never realized he had, that he had loved her since they were children, not just as a partner, but as a person, as someone whose mind and heart had always captivated him. He told her that she was his home, no matter where they went, no matter what they built. The officiant asked for the rings, and they slid them on each other's fingers, the simple, perfect bands glinting in the fading sunlight. The moment felt suspended in time, a pause before the inevitable conclusion, before the words that would bind them forever. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words rang through the air, followed by the thunderous applause of their guests. Malik didn't hesitate. He pulled Camilla into him, pressing a kiss to her lips as the crowd erupted in cheers. The world blurred for a moment, the only thing grounding them the feeling of each other, of hands gripping, of hearts racing. When they finally pulled apart, Camilla laughed, breathless, and Malik grinned down at her, brushing a stray curl from her face. The reception that followed was nothing short of spectacular. The glass pavilion was transformed into a wonderland of golden candlelight, floral arrangements towering over tables where guests dined on meticulously curated dishes. The music was lively, and the dance floor was never empty. They moved through the evening like it was a fairy tale, dancing, laughing, stealing moments of quiet between the celebrations. Malik twirled Camilla under the soft glow of the chandeliers, whispering in her ear how perfect she looked, how he still couldn't believe she was his. She leaned into him, her fingers tracing the outline of his jaw, committing every moment to memory. As the night stretched on, speeches were given, glasses raised in their honor. Their parents spoke of destiny, of how they had always known this love was meant to be. Their friends shared stories of their journey of childhood adventures and the inevitable realization that they were soulmates. Then came the surprise. Camilla's father stood at the center of the room, a proud smile on his face as he gestured toward the open terrace. The guests turned, murmurs of excitement rippling through the crowd. Outside, a sleek, high-end helicopter sat waiting on the estate's private helipad. It was a gift, he explained, a way for them to start their new life with an experience neither of them would ever forget. A breathtaking aerial tour of the coastline, just the two of them. A moment of peace before the world came rushing back in. Camilla gasped, turning to Malik with wide eyes, and he let out a stunned laugh. It was extravagant, unexpected, but undeniably fitting. They had always been a couple that reached for the sky, had sought adventure at every turn. Excited applause followed as they made their way toward the waiting aircraft, stopping to take one last photograph in the glow of the reception lights. As they stepped onto the helicopter, Camilla felt a swell of exhilaration, of love so immense it was almost overwhelming. She took Malik's hand as they settled into their seats, the engines roaring to life. Neither of them knew that in just minutes, their perfect night would turn into an unimaginable nightmare. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the ocean below as the celebrations continued in full swing. The grand reception hall, with its floor-to-ceiling glass windows, glowed against the darkening sky, illuminated by the soft golden candlelight that flickered across the elegantly decorated tables. The laughter of guests mingled with the rhythmic beats of the music. As dancers moved across the marble floors, their joy mirroring the love that had filled the night. Camilla and Malik were in the center of it all, hands intertwined as they made their way through the crowd. Every few steps, another well-wisher stopped them, family members, childhood friends, industry leaders, people whose lives had been touched by their journey. There were warm embraces, heartfelt congratulations, and endless toasts to their happiness. Champagne flowed freely, the glasses clinking together in celebration, a melody of well wishes and promises of a bright future. Camilla could barely keep track of how many times she had been pulled into a hug, or how often Malik had leaned in to whisper sweet reassurances into her ear. She was glowing, the happiness radiating from within, her smile never faltering even as exhaustion threatened to creep in. Malik, too, was thriving in the moment, though he had never been one for grand displays. Tonight he embraced every second, knowing this was the beginning of something greater than either of them had ever known. As the music swelled, the band transitioned into a slower tune, the kind that drew lovers to the dance floor. A hush fell over the guests as Malik turned to Camilla, offering his hand. Without hesitation, she took it, allowing him to lead her into the soft glow of the dance floor, where they were only two that mattered. The world faded away as he pulled her close, their foreheads resting against each other's, bodies swaying in perfect harmony. "I love you," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Malik smiled, his fingers tightening around hers. "I know, and I will love you for the rest of my life." It was a promise, one he would have given his soul to keep. As the song came to an end, applause erupted around them. But before they could step away, the sound of a microphone being tapped drew everyone's attention. Camilla's father stood at the center of the room, his expression unreadable as he motioned for silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with pride, the weight of a father seeing his daughter off into a new life evident in every word. "This is a night to remember, not just for our families, but for every person here who has witnessed the love these to share," he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Camilla and Malik. "A love like this is rare. It is powerful. And as a father, there is nothing more I could have asked for than to see my daughter find a man worthy of her heart." There was a brief pause before he continued, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And so, I wanted to give you both a gift that would mark the beginning of your journey as husband and wife, in a way you would never forget." The doors to the terrace swung open, and a collective gasp swept through the guests. Outside, sitting on the private helipad just beyond the estate, was a sleek, luxurious helicopter. The black and gold exterior gleamed under the soft glow of the reception lights. its rotor blades idle but ready. Camilla turned to Malik, eyes wide with surprise, and he let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "Dad, what is this?" she asked, though her voice was barely above a whisper. Her father chuckled. "A chance for you and your husband to see the world from a new perspective together." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd as the realization set in. This was no ordinary wedding gift, this was an experience. An unforgettable adventure that would take them soaring above the coastline, offering them a breathtaking view of the very place where their love story had reached its pinnacle. A pilot, dressed in a pristine uniform, stepped forward, nodding respectfully. "We're ready when you are, Mr. and Mrs. Diablo." Malik glanced at Camilla, silently asking if she was up for it. And despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her, there was no hesitation. She nodded, her lips curving into an excited smile. "I can't believe this," she whispered as they were guided toward the helicopter. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, the guests cheering as they made their way across the terrace. As they approached, Camilla's father clapped Malik on the shoulder. "Take care of her," he said, though the weight behind those words carried more than just the usual sentiment of a father giving his daughter away. Malik met his gaze and nodded. "Always." With one final wave to their guests, they climbed inside the helicopter. The interior was luxurious, the seats plush, the cabin designed for comfort. Camilla reached for Malik's hand as the pilot began the pre-flight checks, and he squeezed it reassuringly. Engines roared to life, the rotor blades beginning to spin, kicking up a gust of wind that sent Camilla's veil fluttering. She turned to look at the reception one last time, taking in the sight of their loved ones watching from below, their faces glowing with excitement. The moment was surreal. Then, with a smooth lift, they ascended into the night sky. The estate grew smaller beneath them, the coastline stretching endlessly in the distance. The lights of Cape Town twinkled like scattered stars, the ocean reflecting the silver glow of the moon. It was breathtaking, the world spread out before them in a way neither had ever seen before. Camilla leaned her head against Malik's shoulder, sighing in contentment. "This is incredible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "So are you?" For a while, they simply took in the view, the rhythmic hum of the helicopter lulling them into a peaceful silence. Everything felt perfect, until suddenly it wasn't. A sharp gust of wind rocked the helicopter, jolting them violently to the side. Camilla gasped, gripping Malik's arm as the aircraft tilted unnaturally. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset, tense but controlled. "Hold on. We've hit an unexpected crosswind." Malik tightened his grip on her hand. "It's okay," he said, though his voice wasn't as steady as before. Another jolt, this time stronger. The aircraft shuddered, the instruments on the control panel flashing warning signals. Camilla's heart pounded. Something was wrong. The pilot's voice returned, this time sharper. "We're losing stability. Hang on." Then everything happened at once. The helicopter lurched violently, tilting at an unnatural angle. The ocean that had once been a beautiful backdrop was now spinning in sickening circles. The sound of alarms filled the cabin. The pilot fought for control, his hands gripping the controls with desperate precision. Panic clawed at Camilla's chest. Malik pulled her against him, shielding her as best as he could, his arms a steel cage around her trembling form. The ground was coming up fast. There was no time to think. No time to scream, just the deafening roar of the wind and the blaring red lights. Helplessness had known that this was not how the night was supposed to end. And then impact. The moment of impact shattered the world into fragments of fire, steel, and chaos. The deafening sound of metal colliding with the rocky mountainside sent shockwaves through the night, a terrible, guttural roar that drowned out everything else. The hum of the helicopter's blades, the murmurs of the sea far below. Even the faint echoes of their guests' laughter still lingering in the air above the wedding estate. The once smooth, controlled flight had turned into a horrifying spiral. And in the final seconds before the crash, Malik had only enough time to wrap himself around Camilla, shielding her body with his own as the world collapsed around them. The force of the collision wrenched the aircraft apart. The windshield shattered instantly, jagged shards of glass slicing through the cabin. The rotor blades, no longer spinning in controlled precision, tore through the surrounding landscape like blades of death, shearing off the tops of trees before snapping apart upon impact with the solid rock. The tail of the helicopter twisted on itself, crumbling like paper. The fuel tank, already compromised by the violent descent, erupted in a flash of fire, sending a thick plume of black smoke curling into the night sky. Silence followed the crash, an eerie and suffocating absence of sound, as dust and debris settled around the wreckage. Then, seconds later, the flames came alive, licking hungrily at the remains of the aircraft, feeding on the oxygen that rushed in from the mountain winds. The heat swelled instantly, distorting the air in violent waves. Smoke curled through the jagged remnants of the cabin, creeping like a dark omen. The wreckage rested precariously on a steep incline, half on solid rock, and half dangling over a drop-off that led straight into the churning ocean below. The remnants of the once luxurious helicopter groaned under its own weight, threatening to slip further down at any moment. Inside, amidst the wreckage, Camilla stirred first. A low, pained moan escaped her lips as she struggled to move, her mind swimming in a thick haze of confusion. Every inch of her body ached, her head pounded, the disorienting pressure making it nearly impossible to focus. A warm trickle of blood ran down her forehead, stinging her eye. It took her several agonizing seconds to realize where she was, to recall the horrifying moments before the crash. Her breath hitched in her throat as reality set in. They had crashed. The wedding, the reception, the helicopter. Malik. A sudden wave of panic cut through the pain as she tried to turn her head, her limbs sluggish and unresponsive. Her fingers trembled as she reached out blindly, her voice weak and hoarse as she called out his name. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid, making it impossible to take a full breath without coughing. Her hand finally brushed against something solid, a familiar warmth. Malik. He was slumped against the mangled remains of his seat, his face partially obscured by blood and dirt. His white suit, once pristine and tailored to perfection, was torn and darkened with streaks of dirt and crimson. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He was alive. Relief flooded through Camilla, but it was fleeting. The situation was growing worse by the second. Flames crackled behind them, consuming the rear of the aircraft. Sparks rained from exposed electrical wires, sizzling as they met the damp earth. The metallic groan of shifting wreckage sent a spike of fear through her as she realized that, if they didn't move soon, they would either burn alive or plummet off the edge of the cliff. With sheer willpower, she forced herself to move. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain, crawling toward Malik with desperate urgency. Malik, she rasped, shaking his shoulders as much as her injured body would allow. Wake up. His eyelids fluttered, a weak groan slipping past his lips. Camilla. His voice was barely a whisper, strained and distant. His hand twitched as though reaching for her, but his body was too weak to follow through. Tears blurred her vision as she gritted her teeth, shaking him harder. You have to wake up, Malik. We have to get out of here. A sudden shift beneath them sent her heart plummeting. The wreckage was slipping, inching further toward the cliff's edge. If they didn't move now, it would be too late. Summoning every ounce of strength left in her body, she hooked her arms under his and began dragging him toward the shattered side of the cabin, where the fuselage had split open upon impact. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through her, her ribs protesting violently with every inch she gained. Malik groaned in pain, but made no effort to resist. He was barely conscious. Fire behind them roared louder, hungry and insatiable. Heat licked at her back, forcing her forward. Smoke burned her throat, her lungs screaming for relief. She had no choice but to keep moving, even as her own body threatened to collapse. With one final, desperate push, she pulled them both out of the wreckage, tumbling onto the rocky ground just as another explosion burst from the remains of the helicopter. The force sent her rolling down the incline, her fingers slipping from Malik's as gravity pulled them apart. Pain lanced through her as she came to an abrupt stop against a jagged rock. Gasping for breath, she clawed at the ground, forcing herself upright. Malik. She turned frantically, her breath catching in her throat as she spotted him lying just a few feet away. He was still. Ignoring the searing pain in her limbs, she crawled toward him, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his chest, searching for movement. His pulse was faint, but his breathing shallow at present. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gripped his face between her hands, forcing herself to stay calm. Stay with me, Malik, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Please, just stay with me. Above them, the wreckage groaned one last time before finally giving in to gravity. With a screeching screech, the remains of the helicopter slipped over the edge of the cliff, plummeting into the dark abyss below. A final explosion lit up the sky as it met the ocean, sending waves crashing against the rocks. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Camilla barely registered any of it. Her entire focus was on Malik, on keeping him breathing, on keeping herself from breaking apart. Somewhere in the distance, faint and almost imperceptible against the howling wind, she thought she heard voices, the sound of sirens. Help was coming. But as she looked down at Malik's face, his features pale against the blood-stained fabric of his shirt, she wasn't sure if it would come soon enough. The flames roared behind her, the heat pressing against Camilla's back as she clung to Malik. Her fingers tangled in his blood-stained shirt. The wreckage groaned beneath them, metal scraping against stone as the remains of the helicopter shifted dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. Smoke curled into the night sky, a thick black plume rising above the jagged mountainside, carrying with it the final remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Malik was barely breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven gasps. His lips slightly parted as though struggling to form words that never came. Blood trickled from a gash at his temple, staining the pale fabric of his once pristine suit. His fingers twitched in her grasp, weak and unsteady, as though he was trying to hold on to her to anchor himself to the last familiar thing in this nightmare. Camilla. His voice was barely a whisper, fragile and fading. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely down her cheeks. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking as she cupped his face with trembling hands. "Please, just stay with me." His eyes were already losing focus, his gaze flickering between her and the darkness closing in around them. The wreckage beneath them lurched suddenly, a sickening shift that sent fresh waves of terror through Camilla's already battered body. They were too close to the edge. The helicopter had broken apart upon impact, and the remaining structure that hadn't yet fallen was barely holding on, its weight tilting further over the cliffside with each passing second. She had to move. She had to get Malik out of here. Gritting her teeth against the searing pain in her ribs, she wrapped her arms under his shoulders, trying to lift him. Her muscles screamed in protest, her entire body trembling from exhaustion and injury. But she forced herself to keep going. Every inch she managed to drag him felt like a battle against gravity, against time, against the inevitable pull of death lurking just below them. Malik groaned in pain, his head lolling against her shoulder. He was slipping further away, and she could feel it, his body growing heavier in her arms, his grip on consciousness unraveling. The wreckage groaned again, metal scraping against rock. A final warning. "Camilla." Malik's voice was fainter now, almost drowned out by the crackling fire behind them. It's okay." Her breath hitched. "No, it's not. Forget that. You hear me? You're going to be fine." He exhaled a weak, shaky breath. "I love you." The words shattered her. "Don't you dare," she choked, shaking her head violently. "Don't you say goodbye. We're going to make it. Just hold on." The wreckage shifted one final time, a deafening groan of twisted metal, the sickening sound of rock breaking apart beneath them. The section of the aircraft they were clinging to finally lost its battle against gravity. For a moment, there was nothing but weightlessness, the sensation of falling. A gasp caught in Camilla's throat, her fingers still clutching Malik's arm, her body tangled with his as they tumbled together into the abyss. The night sky spun above them, the burning wreckage shrinking in her vision as they plummeted downward. The impact was brutal, cold, unforgiving rock. Darkness swallowed them whole. The ocean roared below, waves crashing against the jagged cliffs in a relentless rhythm, as if the earth itself was mourning. Smoke still coiled through the night sky from the remnants of the wreckage above, a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded on this mountain. The echoes of distant sirens carried through the wind too late, too far to change what had already been sealed by fate. Camilla's body lay still among the scattered debris, her white wedding gown torn and stained with blood and ash. The delicate fabric, once pristine, now clung to her lifeless form, whispering against the cold rock. Her dark curls, once perfectly styled, were now matted with soot, spread across the unforgiving ground. Her fingers were still curled, as if reaching for something or someone. Not far from her, Malik lay motionless, his body draped awkwardly over the jagged terrain, his arms outstretched as if he had been trying to shield her even in their final moments. His wedding suit was torn, streaked with dirt and blood, the fabric no longer holding the elegance it once did. His breathing had ceased long before the first responders even reached the top of the mountain. The night was silent now. Above, Searchlights swept across the wreckage site, beams of artificial light illuminating the devastation. The rescue team moved quickly, but their steps slowed as they reached the edge of the cliff where the wreckage had tumbled into the abyss below. The sight of the mangled bodies against the rocks forced the realization upon them. There would be no survivors. The radios crackled with voices, confirming what the world would soon hear. They're gone. Far above, at the wedding estate, where only hours ago there had been music and laughter, the news spread like wildfire. Gasps turned to sobs, disbelief giving way to the raw, gut-wrenching agony of loss. Mothers collapsed into the arms of fathers, friends clung to each other, their hands trembling. The celebration had become a wake in an instant. Camilla's father stood frozen, the weight of his daughter's death crashing down on him like a force he could not withstand. His wife's wails of despair echoed through the night, a sound that would haunt every guest for the rest of their lives. Malik's parents, once so full of pride, now held on to each other as if their own hearts had been torn from their chests. Somewhere among the scattered petals and half-empty champagne glasses, the remnants of a dream still lingered. A love story that should have lasted decades had been reduced to a single, cruel night. Down below, in the quiet aftermath of tragedy, the wind carried a single piece of fabric through the air. Camilla's veil, torn free from her head in the fall, fluttered one last time before settling among the wildflowers, growing in the cracks of the mountain, a delicate, silken ghost among the ruins. It would remain there, untouched, a silent memorial to a love that burned bright but was never meant to last. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch our other videos for more incredible stories. And don't forget to share this video with others.